and our guest is Professor Ken Gormley, who is the author of The Death of American Virtue, Clinton versus Starr, or Clinton v. Starr. Good morning.
Good morning, Sam. It's a pleasure to be with you.
And you. The first question I wanted to ask you is, well, it's a statement and then a question. To my knowledge, Ken Starr had never prosecuted a case before Whitewater. Why was he chosen?
Well, under the independent counsel law, the idea is to pick someone who's viewed as neutral, and he hadn't prosecuted a case. He had obviously been a federal judge, solicitor general, had worked in the Justice Department, had worked on, this is forgotten, worked on the Packwood Diaries investigation.
Senator Packwood from Oregon.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, there has been, Archibald Cox, whose biography I wrote, who was the, famous Watergate special prosecutor who stood up to President Nixon, had never prosecuted a case either. So there was precedent for that, although I think that did turn out to be a problem in this case.
I remember reading that Mr. Starr wanted to leave this case to take a position at Pepperdine and was talked out of it. Is that true?
Yeah, it is true. In the winter of 1997, he announced that he was going to leave to go to Pepperdine, and he was very happy about that. The Whitewater investigation had pretty much run its course, was wrapping up, and he was pummeled by both sides, both the Democrats and the Republicans, for being a quitter, for not finishing or whatever, and he did a quick turnabout and decided to stay, and I think that's when things started going off the track, because shortly after that, his prosecutors and agents began interviewing women in Arkansas about possible sexual relationships with President Clinton, and that's when, at least according to Bob Woodward, who I interviewed, and others, that's when things seemed to take a new turn.
Our guest is Ken Gormley, author of The Death of American Virtue, about Bill Clinton versus Ken Starr. One of the things when I was reading about this case in your book and before this is there were people who, frankly, kind of got victimized by this investigation. A kid getting pulled out of gym class, a woman getting investigated and almost going bankrupt because she had to hire a lawyer. Why or how did it go so far afield?
Well, Sam, that's the amazing thing. You couldn't have made up this story in your wildest imagination. I mean, there are bodies littered across the road everywhere. Jim McDougal, who starts out as the guy who invests in Whitewater and gets Bill and Hillary Clinton to invest, and he ends up dying in prison, and that was a kind of strange piece of the story. But as you've mentioned, there are people all along who are Webster Hubbell, who goes to prison, loses his job. I mean, it's just, a lot of it is this confluence of events, but a lot of it is that both sides lacked restraint here. Both sides were kind of fighting to the death. And I think if you look in the mirror on this, and that's why I spent 9 years working on it, and I thought it was important, I think neither side comes out looking great, and I think we have to examine the fact that all of us were partly to blame for this.
The final upshot of the Whitewater section of this investigation, leaving aside Monica Lewinsky, was, from one point of view, not mine, but from one point of view, $45 million to find out that the Clintons lost money on a real estate investment. How close is that to the truth?
Well, I think that's a bit of an overstatement. I mean, certainly the Clintons did lose money on the deal. You have to look at it in this perspective. Here you have Jim McDougal, who is a real estate guy in Arkansas, who also then gets into the S&L business, and the S&L starts going belly up. There are all these financial irregularities. He's convicted and goes to prison, and all of a sudden, it's determined that Bill Clinton is running for president, and he was a business partner of this guy. So it's not unreasonable that the national media would want to dig into the fact that this guy, who also is kind of becoming increasingly mentally unstable, was a business partner of the president. So, I think it's a little unfair to just suggest there was nothing there. There were pieces of it where there were convictions, there were serious issues. The question is what role the Clintons played in it. And I think their role was minimum, and that's the part that got kind of over-exaggerated, I think.
The imprisonment of Susan McDougal was condemned by a lot of people. Do you think that imprisonment was justified? I know she wouldn't testify, but given the fact that there was a feeling she didn't have a lot to contribute to this because her husband kept things from her,
right.
Jim McDougal's wife, this woman was in jail for 2 years. I don't have a memory of anybody being in jail for 2 years, not even reporters, for failing to disclose sources.
That's a good point, Sam. I mean, you're right that it is very uncommon to be put in jail for contempt for 2 years, although, as Susan Weber Wright said freely in interviews, all she had to do was answer the questions. But, I did interview jurors from the Whitewater jury, and they felt that Susan McDougal clearly was implicated in some of the wrongdoing, and so although I'm sympathetic with Susan McDougal, the fact is she was convicted. The part that I found most interesting, as you know, I think I did reveal that she did, in fact, have a relationship with President Clinton, then Governor Clinton, albeit a short relationship. However,
although not a short list.
yeah, exactly. But I concluded that was not the reason that she did not testify. I mean, there's no question at all. She did not testify because she believed no matter what she told Ken Starr, he would not be satisfied if it did not implicate the Clintons. She had seen her husband, Jim, turned into, as she said, a craven liar by the Office of Independent Counsel, as he tried to spin stories to get himself out of jail. So I am firmly convinced of that point, that Susan McDougal went to jail and stayed in jail because she hated Ken Starr by that point, and rightly or wrongly, rationally or irrationally, believed she would end up in prison anyway.
I have a theory, and I'd like to proffer it to you. And our guest is Ken Gormley, who is a professor of law at Duquesne in Pittsburgh and the author of The Death of American Virtue, a book he took 10 years to write. So if anything we know about Professor Gormley, patience is a virtue.